time to silence the phone, leave the photos to the pros, and enjoy the show.
God bless you, motherfuckers. I'm Bad-Ass Culpepper, country music hall of famer, musician, husband, daddy, lover, hunter, drinker, and most important, red-blooded American male. I'm going to plunge you head first into the saga of Tommy Margolin, former red-blooded American male. Tommy Margolin, a man who lost his career, his woman, his condo, his car, his reputation, and worst of all, his pride, thanks to a satanic snake-like force known to the world as Me Too. But first, let me favor you with a sample of my biggest hit song and the most popular request at weddings. Every woman knows I'm a lover that just won't quit. I can't take a lousy nipple. I need the whole tit. And now back to the sad and tragic saga of Tommy Margolin, the premier motivational speaker or influencer, as you young people call them, on the evils of Me Too and the wrath of woke. These forces destroyed Tommy's life 2 years before I met him when he was coming home on an airplane, flying home from an architectural conference in Minneapolis and going back to his home in New York City in Midtown in Manhattan. During this flight, he sat next to a young lady he'd never met before, getting along just fine, having a little conversation, some drinks, when the force of nature, he had to answer nature's call. So he got up to use the facilities when the plane was hit with the worst, most God-fearing turbulence you can imagine, so sudden that he was sent forward with his hand landing on this unfortunate young lady's hoo-ha. Well, naturally, Tommy apologized. The young lady accepted. Everything seemed copacetic for the rest of the flight until Tommy got home to his condo in Midtown Manhattan and found himself the subject of a major sexual harassment lawsuit. Next thing Tommy knew, he lost his architectural license. He got kicked out of his condo. He got divorced from his wife, and we had to pay all sorts of alimony to, and he had to pay this young lady he sat next to on the plane a huge settlement that sent him into a hole in the Bronx that he had to live in, and also as part of a plea bargain to stay out of jail for sexual harassment, he had to take a job, but more likely a glob, cleaning toilets at Hardin Tower, the very tower that he designed himself and won an architectural award when he used to have an architecture license. Anyhow, to make a long story short, I first met Tommy 2 years later when he gave his very first motivational influencer speech at Max's Theater. That's a theater in New York City owned by my good friend Max Rebar from the show business. And I was also there at the invite of Niles Fletcher, Tommy's co-worker at the Hardin Tower cleaning toilets. And Niles was also the bouncer at my favorite strip club in Flushing, New York, where I was known as the king of the lap dances. And I mean giving, not receiving. Anyhow, to make a short story even shorter, I was sitting in back when Tommy was giving his speech. The Max's Theater was chock full of people, and I was sitting in back, clean shaven, not wearing my trademark shades or cowboy hats, so the fans wouldn't recognize me and distract from Tommy. Not that that would have been a problem, because everyone, including me, was enraptured by Tommy's sad, touching story about being destroyed by Me Too, which he finished off with these powerful words: "Thank you all for coming down to Max's Theater tonight to hear about the wrath of woke. Now I want you to love bomb your husbands and your wives. Say this while hugging your kids. Eat Jane Crow. Eat Jane Crow. Eat Jane Crow. Thank you. Good night. See you across America." Well, I was so moved by these words that I immediately invited Tommy back to my private tour bus, which I had parked outside Max's Theater, for a beer. This is a bus that I know not only ride in by myself on the road when I'm on tour, but I drive it so I can have some alone time, think about song ideas, concert ideas, show ideas, and maybe read the Bible and drink a beer. So anyhow, me and Tommy are enjoying a beer. And meanwhile, I should mention that my band of over 20 years, the Jackrabbits, my 5-piece band, they got their own tour bus, which they follow in behind me when we're on the road. Anyhow, to get back to the bus I'm on, me and Tommy were having beers, kicking back, having a good old time. When I turned to Tommy, I say, Tommy, can you hear me? Tell me how you got your name, boy, and I'll tell you all about how I got branded the Bad-Ass the day I was born in Lubbock, Texas. Tommy looks down sheepishly, nods his head, and says, yeah, my mom and dad did name me after the Who album. I've been hearing so many references to that, I'm kind of blind, deaf, and dumb to them. But anyhow, thank you for inviting me to have a beer with you on your bus, Mr. Culpepper. And at this, I looked at Tommy rather less friendly-like and stoically, and I said, Mr. Culpepper was my no-good, shit-kicking drunk of a daddy. Call me Bad-Ass, and I'm calling you the Messiah, boy. And at this, Tommy looked at me with the fear of God in his eyes, and he said, well, that means a lot coming from a stage professional like yourself. But I'm no Messiah. I'm just a messenger. And at this, I said to Tommy, Tommy, can you feel me near you? That's what I tell people, too, that I'm a messenger for God. And at this, Tommy leans in towards me to speak almost conspirational-like, and he says, from God's lips to your ears, I hope he whispers. Hail glory, I said. And I continued on with, now I know you've got a real rouser with that Eat Jane Crow bird call, but Niles tells me on the phone while I'm lap dancing and flushing about another drill. Damn, it's fine. In fact, I liked it so much I even started writing a song on it before I come down to your show tonight. And at this, Tommy, to my surprise, looks down with just absolute shame. Just shame, and he says, yeah, it is fine, but it won't help me reunite with my wife and my family. And I said, well, consider me and my band, the Jackrabbits, and my 18 million fans your family. That's why you got to join me on my biggest bud of a tour in 5 years. It kicks off in Atlanta. It strokes 50 cities across this shapely body of land. And at this, once again, Tommy looked at me with the fear of God in his eyes and said, 50 cities? Damn, that sounds like a year on the road. And I said, well, what you got cooking here in New Jack City? Tommy replied, well, I got my cleaning job at the very tower I designed, Hardin Tower, cleaning toilets nowadays, and I also got my hole in the Bronx that I have to live in after getting kicked out of my condo that can't be cleaned. And I said, quit your job, pull out of your hole, and join me on the crusade for custard pie. And at this time he looked at me admiringly, as he should, and said, you, sir, are the Messiah of words. You sure you need God? And I said, like I need one good hand to cop a field. Now, if you and me and God are going to write a hit song, I'm going to need a little more nitty-gritty than what went down on the airplane between you and the camel toe. And at this, Tommy looked down thoughtfully, took a long swig of his beer, looked upward thoughtfully, gargled some of that beer, swallowed it, and looked at me and said, all right, fair enough. But first, you got to fulfill your end of the bargain. You know, remember, tell me all about how you got named Bad-Ass? I said, Joe Campbell, you got a deal. Just remember, this is between you and me, unless we forget God. Well, wouldn't you know it, a month later, me and Tommy are kicking off our 50-city tour, headlining at the Atlanta Coliseum. Tommy is naturally my opening act, while me and the Jackrabbits are setting up on stage just behind him. Tommy is getting the crowd going, getting everyone excited and sweaty, getting the nipples hard and everything. He's telling them all about Wrath of Woke and the Menace of Me Too, and he's finishing up with these beautiful words. I want you to take this to your places of work and places of worship. These three important words: eat Jane Crow, eat Jane Crow, eat Jane Crow. Now the man of the band you've been waiting for all this time, Bad-Ass Culpepper and his Jackrabbits. And at this time he runs to the back of the stage, as he will on every stop on our tour, to dance, clap along, maybe even play the tambourine that I taught him on that bus the first night. And I run up to the head of the stage with my microphone and I say, Tommy speaks God's truth. This man is kicking off a revolution that you guys helped cut the cord from right here in Atlanta. And you guys are also midwife in the birth of a brand new song that me and Tommy wrote on my beloved bus. It's called Kill Me Too. Hit it, boys. I was flying home from Minnesota all the way to New York City, sitting next to some Lolita, and damn, did she look pretty. All I did was say hi, and she said, remember me too. Next thing I know, my ass is in D block, where they say, kill me too, kill me too, Kill me too. Kill me too. I'm going to get me a lawyer and sue Miss Me Too's socks off. Send her back to the convent where she got her only rocks off. She better not get a legal eagle dropping shit like Watt did, because my attorney's from the firm of cocaine, heroin, and meth. Sing it with me one more time. Drink it deep like a cold brew. Let's grab it by the throat so it won't kill me too. Kill me too. Kill me too. Kill me too. Well, the next 2 months of the tour go by just like cream through gravy. We're hitting 1-2 cities a night, and we're just having a good old time. Tommy's getting the crowd excited. His message is going viral, he's going international, and we're just having so much fun. I'm plumb tired after 2 months of nonstop touring and playing and shouting and hollering and whatnot, so I'm ready for a break, and it turns out we got a few days in between our last gig and our next gig at Flagstaff Coliseums in Flagstaff, Arizona. So what I do is I park my private bus at the Flagstaff airport, and I get in my private plane, which I Christian Bad Air, fly back to my ranch in Lubbock to check on my livestock, my sheep and my goats and whatnot. Meanwhile, Tommy, along with our two co-tour managers, that being Niles Fletcher, Tommy's former co-worker from Hardin Tower cleaning toilets and the former bouncer of my favorite strip club in Flushing, where I'm known as the king of the lap dances, and Max Rebar, the owner of Max's Theater, where Tommy gave his very first motivational influencer speech and where Tommy and me first met. Well, anyhow, they get things set up with the Jackrabbits, and I'm flying back on my private plane. Mind you, in addition to driving my own bus, I also fly my own plane. So I'm flying in, cruising in, soft, smooth landing at Flagstaff Airport when I'm taxiing on the airport, or that runway, I guess you call it, and I'm seeing the recognizable figures of Max Rebar, Tommy Margolin, and Niles Fletcher standing like the Praetorian Guard in front of the little Flagstaff Airport. And as I'm taxiing in, I can read their lips from a mile away because I got skills like that Deaf, Dumb, and Blind fella from the Who album. So anyhow, I see Max looking at Tommy, looking around all starry-eyed. Max says to Tommy, "So, still got stars in your eyes from being the hottest motivational speaker since that Deaf, Dumb, and Blind twat?" And Tommy looks down at Max wearily and says, "No, it's just been a long time since I've been in an airport." And Niles in turns looks at Tommy wearily and says, "Well, it's just Flagstaff Airport, not Charles de fucking Gaulle." And at this, Tommy looks at Niles wearily and says, "Well, ever since I was put on that no-fly list as part of my plea bargain 2 years ago, all airports to me these days are Charles de fucking Gaulle." And at this point, my plane has come to a stop. I've opened the door. TSA has put those cute little stairs by the door for me to walk down like a movie star. I'm walking towards these fellas. They're still talking. In addition to being able to read lips from a mile away, I got the hearing of a person 3 times younger my age, despite being in the music industry for 30 years. And I'm closing in on these fellas as Tommy looks at Max in his suit that he's been wearing for the last 2 months of the tour as one of our tour managers. And he says to Max, "Well, must have stars in your eyes from wearing that suit these last 2 months in all these hot climates." And Max says to Tommy, "Moses, I never feel off this caftan. I never know who I might strike a hot kosher deal with." And at this, Tommy looks around, sniffs the air, and says, "Well, how come you smell so good?" And Max raises his arms and says, "I got deodorant packs sewn into my armpits. Come on, take a sniff. Come on, boy." And at this, Tommy reluctantly, naturally, leans in, takes a sniff of Max's armpit, and lets out an like he just walked out of the most beautiful perfume shop on Park Avenue. And at this point, I'm finally closing in on these fellas and saying, "Daddy's home. Daddy's home. Bad-Ass is back from R&R in Lubbock, Texas. I'm ready to hit the road again. Gather round, children, and let Papa Culpepper give you boys a great big Texas-style hug." And at this, I decide to play a little joke on Max because he's kind of sensitive about his heritage and all. So I first get Tommy a hug, then Niles a hug, and then I immediately start talking about our gig that night at Flagstaff Coliseum when I hear Max behind me going, No hug for the Jew, you redneck fuck. And at this, I stifle a giggle, turn around, act all surprised, and say, oh, I'm sorry, Max. Sun so bright, thought you was TSA in that suit. Come on, give us a hug, Jew boy. And at this, Max and I give ourselves a great big Texas style, New York style hug. And as we're doing it, I'm feeling like I'm in the most beautiful perfume shop at Dallas Fort Worth Airport. I walk away from Max saying, damn boy, what is that sexy scent? And Tommy cuts that hoo-ha with, it's really the pits. You ready to go to the hotel now? And I say to Tommy, hold on, sugar. I want to have a word with you private like on the bus before we snuggle in at the Flagstaff Hilton. Niles, Max, do daddy a solid and get the bags from the Bad Air Express, will you? And as me and Tommy are walking towards my bus, we can both overhear Niles and Max saying in unison, the fucking gall. Well, 10 minutes later, my bus is heaving and rocking, but not from humping or partying. It's all from anger, and the anger ain't from me because I'm cool as a cucumber, sitting back, drinking a beer, strumming on my guitar, and all the anger's coming from Tommy, who's standing over me, pointing his finger at me like it's a dagger, and looking at me with bulging eyes like he's Ted Bundy going in for the kill. And he says to me, no, absolutely not. Niles and Max are friends of mine. Christ, Niles saved my ass. And I look up at Tommy to correct him like a teacher, and I say, no, Negro, I saved your ass. And at this, Tommy gets even more angry and offended. I don't know why, for some reason, so I try to calm him down, don't succeed, but I do try, and I say, now look, while I was kicking it, taking a load off, getting my rocks off of my ranch in Lubbock, I was going over the books, and I see that this here speaking singing tour is going into financial overdrive. It's that time I'll make some deep cuts to the side of beef, and the worst gristle and fat I can taste are sons, Niles, and Max. And at this point, right away, me and Tommy jolt as we hear none other than the voice of Niles at the front of the bus by the entrance saying, well then, Daddy, who's gristle? And Max joining in with, and who's fat, Daddy? And Tommy turns around, looks with his bulging Ted Bundy eyes, and Niles and Max standing by the entrance and says, how long have you two been on this bus? And Max says, long enough to hear you sticking in the shit, Judas. And at this, Tommy raises up his palms like he's in the spotlight by the Flagstaff PD and says, no, I'm sticking up for you guys. And I cut that hoo-ha with, and he's losing at it. I turn to Niles and Max and I say, sorry, fellas, but you ain't tour managers. You ain't even roadies. You're groupies without tits. And at this point, Max looks at me with bulging eyes, more like John Wayne Gacy, and he says, without tits, didn't you and me just hug in the airport tarmac? And at this point, Niles continues that thought with, yeah, Culpepper, you ain't nothing but a carbuncle, and your music makes me want to evacuate my pants. Now, at this point, there's a long pause as me and Tommy and Max look at Niles in confusion. A confusion broken by Max when he slugs Niles good-naturedly in the shoulder, which for some reason causes Niles to immediately yelp and whimper in pain like a puppy dog who's been kicked, and he's stroking his shoulder while Max says, come on, Niles, let's evacuate from this bus. And all Niles can say is, you know, I might have fought 3 years in Iraq and led the Battle of Fallujah, but I bruise easy. And at this, Max chuckles and says, well then, we can nurse her owies at my favorite bar in the Las Vegas Strip. I got a bottomless tab there. I know the bartender. It's open 24/7, and we can call my lawyer in New York and sue this redneck ass. Come on, let's leave. So Max steps off the bus, nursing his bruised ego. Niles follows close behind, nursing his bruised shoulder, and me, I'm strumming my pink, healthy, happy guitar as I say to Tommy, you know, that's the damnedest thing. This here family breakup just inspired a brand new song. Tommy turns around, looks at me with bulging eyes, like, you guessed it, Ted Bundy, and says, what happened to God? You fire him too? Well, as you can imagine, for me being the only one on stage here, the show must go on. So me and Tommy being professionals, we get over our personal differences and get back to the show that night. at the Flagstaff Coliseum, and me and the Jackrabbits are setting up just behind Tommy, and Tommy's clearly feeling good, feeling the love from the crowd because he's going 10 minutes overtime, long after me and the Jackrabbits had set up. And at this point, I'm feeling like Ted Bundy, so I walk up stealthily behind Tommy like I'm a serial killer and stop just behind him as he's finishing with, hopefully, with these words. And you know what the worst part is? Ever since I was put on that no-fly list 2 years ago as part of my plea bargain following that last fateful, awful flight, I can't walk down any street in any city in this beautiful country without some woman looking at me like I'm some kind of a stalker. Well, I'm tempted to say to these ladies, excuse me, women, I'm not stalking, I'm just walking. And at this point, I poke Tommy in the back of the ribs, turns around, I give him the evil eye, nods his head knowingly, turns back to the crowd and says, excuse me, sorry, looks like I'm going into overtime myself. So just remember these words, folks. We're not stalking, we're just walking. Now the man in the band, and I'm standing so close behind him, he practically pokes me in the eyes. He says, and now the man in the band you've been waiting for, Bad-Ass Culpepper and his Jackrabbits. And at this point, Tommy once again runs to the stage as he always does on every stop on our tour. Just dance, clap along, and maybe finally play that damn tambourine I taught him on the bus that first night. I run to the head of the stage with my microphone. And I say, listen to what Tommy says, y'all. You hear? We're not stalking, we're just rocking. And now here's another brand new song that me and Tommy wrote on my bus. And it goes like this. Hit it, boys. Nothing beats young girls fresh and juicy and tender. They get me in a whirl like a margarita in a blender. I'm going to tell you one time, loud as clear as can be. It's on the tip of my tongue, and I want you to sing it with me. I like 'em young. I like 'em young. I like 'em young. I like 'em young. They got that new girl smell that makes roses out of dung. Sweeter than water from a well, that's 'cause we like 'em young. Come on, admit it, we like 'em young. Sing along, we like 'em young. Clap along, we like 'em young. Play your tambourine along, we like 'em young. We like 'em young. A 10,000 strong heart on I see out there. That's I like 'em young. Some words of wisdom from my man, ace pilot, Tommy Margolin. And at this, as me and the band, the Jackrabbits, are setting up for the next song on our set list, we, the band, and our 10,000 strong heart on in Flagstaff Coliseum can hear Tommy loud and clear whimpering, if I earn royalties from this song, I do deserve to go to jail. Well, Tommy did not go to jail, at least not for the next 2 weeks of the tour, as we're hitting 1 to 2 cities a day, going like cream through gravy. Things are going so good that we got another few days to, the gap between our last stop and our next stop in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I tell the band, I'm getting all tongue-tied and everything, so I tell the band, let's take a rest. Take the night off, don't practice or nothing like that. Just kick back in your tour bus, have a beer, and just kick back and relax. When, to my fans and fellow Americans, I reach out to you not as a country music hall of famer, but as a man who has just lost 5 men who were brothers in more than blood. As the world has heard by now, my band of over 20 years, the Jackrabbits, Bo Brumrush Jenkins on guitar, Dan Squeezer Lemon on bass, Larry Stinkfinger Smalls on percussion, Dirty Dog Hal Vickers on Hammond organ, and this one really hurts the most because I love that boy, like he was my own boy, Jack Scratching Hives on drums. Were blown to kingdom come by homemade explosives placed under their tour bus. Now, this attack was clearly meant for me, for I'm famous for traveling solo on my own tour bus, from which I'm speaking to you now in an undisclosed location. My Jackrabbits were family men, professional musicians and masters of barbecue. The terrorists that committed this heinous act had better pray that the police or the FBI get to them before me and some well-armed amigos do. Well, as you can imagine, the show must go on. So after me and Tommy cancel the rest of the tour, talk to the police and the FBI, look at the bodies, identify the charred remains of the jackrabbits. Tommy checks out of his motel in Santa Fe, New Mexico, climbs onto my bus, and we drive to the only place logical to continue the mission, because maybe the tour is over, but the mission ain't. So me and Tommy drive like jackrabbits ourselves over to the only place that makes sense, and that's Max's favorite bar on the Las Vegas Strip. And we finally get there at 4:30 in the morning, and we get into the bar because it is open 24/7. And naturally, the bar is empty, kind of like this theater. And we find the only customers are Niles and Max's. And when we're approaching their booth, it's clear that they have not, for the last 2 weeks, they have been doing nothing but drinking. They have not bathed. They have not slept. They have not eaten, and worst of all, as I mentioned, they have not bathed. As we approach the booth, Tommy says to me, "Well, I guess this is the best place in town to suck it down." And I say to Tommy, "Bars in Vegas never open because they never close." Damn, Muse, she just gave me another song lyric. Anyhow, at this point, finally, Niles and Max look up and recognize us after we've been standing in front of their booth for several minutes. They're looking at us with bloodshot eyes, and Max says to the both of us through his bloodshot eyes, "Well, look who's here." Wait, where is here? And as usual, Niles continues Max's thought with, "Carbuncle, you ain't nothing but a Culpepper, and, well, if it ain't Bad-Ass Carbuncle and his bus crush. If you two think me and Max were behind the blowing up of the Jackrabbit's bus, well, you check with the bartender. We've been sitting here having drinks, having a good time, bottomless tab, trying to get a hold of Max's lawyer for the last 2 weeks. Or is that months?" At this point, Tommy waves his hand in front of his face. He goes, "Phew, that must explain why you two smell like I used to do after work at Hardin Tower." And at this, Max looks at Tommy with a twinkle in one bloodshot eye and says, "Well, forgive us. This bar don't come with no shower, Your Royal Highness." And I cut that hoo-ha with, "Fuck King Charles." I don't blame you boys for skunking us, because me and Tommy took a great big giant steaming shit on you back in Flagstaff. And at this point, I feel a little poke in the back of my ribs, and I turn around to see Tommy leaning in towards me, conspirational-like, and he says, "Well, actually, you took the shit on them, badass. I just watched." And at this point, Max fixes Tommy with a twinkle in his other bloodshot eye and says, "Like all those people on that plane watched you chair a meeting of the Mile High Club." And at this, Tommy almost automatically points his dart-like finger and bulges his Ted Bundy eyes at Max and says, "I never penetrated that woman." And I cut that hoo-ha with, "Fuck the penetration. We tracked you two down here because we got a proposal for you all." And at this point, there's the longest amount of silence you ever heard, followed by the biggest gale of laughter and fluids and saliva and other things coming from Niles and Max, as Max turns to Niles and says, "You hear that, Niles? We just been proposed to." And Niles naturally continues Max's thought with, "Yeah, maybe we should all get a double wedding, ministered by Elvis." And once again, Tommy waves his hand in front of his face and says, "Why not? You two smell like his throne did after Elvis died. Now, come on, we're professionals here. We got to get over our personal differences. We got to get back to the mission." And at this, Max fixes Tommy with a twinkle in both bloodshot eyes and says, "Well, what exactly is the mission, Captain James T. Cunt?" And I cut in with, "Work, join Bad-Ass Culpepper and Tommy Margolin as we lead a march down the Vegas Strip with every man in town who's been wronged by me too. And considering what a rip-off them flesh dance hoedowns are around here, we'll get an army going in no time." And at this, there's another long silence, followed by the biggest gale of laughter, saliva, and other fluids from Niles and Max, as Max says to me, "Well, what are we going to do? Put the fear of God into every showgirl in town with those fearsome words? Kill me too?" And Niles naturally continues his thought with, "How about eat Jane Crow?" Ooh, I got goosebumps. And at this, Tommy once again points his finger a little less severely and bulges his eyes more like a mafioso don and says, "You're the one who thought up that mantra, Dalai Lama." And I cut that hoo-ha with, "Fuck the Dalai Lama." It's going to be that chant that me and Tommy come up with back in Flagstaff. You ready, boy? Okay, here goes. We're not stalking, we're just walking. We're not stalking, we're just walking. At this, finally, Niles and Max are inspired enough to have the blood leave their eyes and the fluid dry in their pants, and they stagger up off their vinyl booth to join me and Tommy in two more choruses, rousing choruses. So, we're not stalking, we're just walking. We're not stalking, we're just walking. I finally closed that choral practice with, oh, that's beautiful, fellas. If only my 10 or 11 or however many children I got have voices like yours. I know my 3 ex-wives do. And if this Max looks down somberly, soberly, and says, yeah, that feels good. Right up to my precious armpits. And he smells his armpits and immediately lowers his arms and says, oy vey, the pack's expired. And Niles fixes Max with a twinkle in his newly whitened eyes and says, like your Jewishness? And Niles turns to me and Tommy and says, so what's the plan, fellas? And Tommy this time cuts in with, we'll put out the word on this man's app, on every phone owned by a man in Las Vegas. We'll tell every man in town to meet us tonight at 7 p.m. in front of the Luxor Sphinx. We'll lead a march down the Vegas Strip that will finally, once and for all, bring Me Too to its knees in defeat. And at this, no bar at 4:30 in the morning heard such a whoop and a holler and a yell and whatnot from 4 drunk, forgetful, and smelly old men. And at this, Max plugs Niles good-naturedly in the shoulder. Niles is feeling so good and so drunk. The PTSD is not shooting out of, from his arm, so he ain't rubbing his arm. And Max says to Niles, so come on, Niles, let's find us a halfway decent motel. And I cut that hoo-ha with, fuck the motel. I got enough room in my suite at the Bellagio for, well, at least one of you. And at this, I turn to Tommy and I say, how about your digs, Tommy? And Tommy shrugs his shoulders and says, yeah, I got an extra bed at my suite at the Motel 6. And at this point, Niles trots up to Tommy, not like a puppy dog in pain, but a puppy dog in heat, his tail wagging, his tongue hanging out and panting. And he says to Tommy, Motel 6, that's where I lost my virginity. And at this point, Tommy heaves a final, resigned, desperate sigh and says, maybe we should all get married by Elvis. God bless you, motherfuckers. We're coming to the end of Tommy's testimony. I know you're looking forward to that because in addition to driving my own bus, flying my own plane, dancing my own lap dances in Flushing, I can read minds. So yes, we are coming to the end of Tommy's testimony, how he got railroaded on a plane and wound up joining forces with yours truly in saving America from the wrath of woke. Now, before me and the fellas lead our Million Hombre march down the Vegas Strip, I'm going to finally unload my nutsack on all of you about how I got named, legally and in full, Bad-Ass. I sprung from my mama down in Lubbock, Texas. The doctor was so fired up, he slapped my half-breed Mex ass. I got a sore so red, it never left my solar plexus. So my mama and my daddy said this boy can only be Culpepper. Bad-Ass. Gentlemen, assume the position. We're not stalking, we're just walking. We're not stalking, we're just walking. We're not stalking, we're just walking. You're all right, Jane. Me too. And the horse you rode it on. Thank you.